Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today in today's Connecting the Dots in the Global Digital Ecosystem webinar. With me here today is Mark Daly, our Director of Digital Strategy and Business Development here at Epsilon. He will be walking us through the drivers of a global digital ecosystem, enabling a smart network, and the competitive advantages of software-defined networking and the opportunities they present. Before we start, here are some housekeeping items. If you have a question that we have not addressed in our session, please feel free to ask in the question and answer box below. After the end of the webinar, we will also be sending you a recording of the session, along with some useful resources which you can share with your team. Now, I'll hand over the time over to Mark. Mark, please.
Thank you very much, and hi everybody. Thank you very much for tuning in today to listen to me talk a little bit about the emergence of SDN and how we see that enabling a very different type of enterprise ecosystem. So from an enterprise perspective, the cloud has been and made a huge and dramatic change to the working life of the ICT teams within the enterprises, of anybody who's involved in the construction of the business application layer, the services that the enterprise consumes itself and also presents, and how it presents out to its customer base. And as a result, with this complexity of the cloud in particular, enterprises are needing to embrace a different type of interconnection strategy. And those drivers, as you can see in the bullet points here on the left-hand side, really fundamentally constructed around the new complexity. And that complexity is around the distribution of different business systems in different clouds, different environments, and also at different vertical levels. So accessing this new complex business system ecosystem, or should I just say business ecosystem, is becoming more and more important, and in some cases has become more difficult for ICT teams. So they're looking at how they need to deliver a digital transformation within their own environments to better access these business ecosystems, to integrate them, and then enable them to better serve their own customer base. Traditionally as well, in terms of telecommunication services, the telco community has been quite bad at presenting visibility of service. And in a world where multiple connections are required to access your business ecosystem, that visibility is becoming more and more important. That is enabling as well the ability then to drive decision making, access services in a faster way, and at the same time understand that increasing competition that's emerging from born in the cloud type companies, as an example, means that enterprises have to be more or swifter on their feet, and therefore need better tools to be able to access speed, agility, and be able to orchestrate services very quickly. And at the same time, like all companies in the world, there's always a pressure to reduce costs and deliver things more quickly. So these needs are summarized in terms of what a telco needs to deliver an enterprise as providing better access to services, reducing latency and time to access, costs, providing more visibility, in this case in the bullet point transparency, really providing the ability to provide a consumer-orientated approach to delivering services that also deliver on the needs for fast, reliable, secure, and on-demand services. So in a nutshell, essentially how telcos have to reframe their service presentation is around presenting three key elements: a cloud-like service presentable to the enterprise, enabling that service to be as automated and as self-serving as possible, and providing a connected fabric across the particular ecosystem that an enterprise would need to access and control, as well as utilize. So these are the three key focus points for any telecommunications company in terms of what we need to do in terms of digital transformation and presenting our services. But flipping that around from an enterprise perspective, these are the three key questions that you would be asking any telco as to what is your approach to enabling me. I'd like to see how you're providing this cloud characteristic base. Is it automated? How easy is it to create? Is it visible? And what is it enabling me to connect and control? So from a telecommunications perspective, most people in our community would have heard of the term SDN, software-defined networking, probably over one or more decades. It's a term that's been around for a long time. The control of networking has been around for a long time, but this presentation layer in a single control point has really taken off and driven primarily by the advent of the need for speed within the data centers, and that acceptance and growth has emerged and shown real case studies for global telcos to deploy this SDN capability. Software-defined networking is really the agent for change in the telecommunications networking world. It is the ability to command and control your network, and in some cases now other people's networks, to be able to provide services in a very quick time frame, as well as the ability to scale up and down and access connected endpoints very, very quickly. From a value perspective, the ability to access these cloud-like characteristics has changed the way that telecom services are presented, particularly for next generation companies that are very familiar with cloud characteristics. And at the same time, by presenting control to enterprise itself, is providing much more flexibility, much more power, and driving new types of services, all through the ability to provide this software-defined networking, not just within the telco itself, but to the enterprise. So there are many, many useful tools, useful advantages, and useful outcomes that are being generated by software-defined networking. But to cut it down to its finest delivery point, it's providing something that we've provided as telecommunications service providers for 100 years, being able to deliver, provide, give visibility in a very, very quick and useful manner, and provide that capability to our customer base, as opposed to performing those tasks ourselves and the customer itself only receiving the service as a function. This now is a service that I can control from an enterprise point of view. So SDN, in summary, is definitely a game changer. It's enabling globalization as well in terms of accessing global networks and enabling those networks to be controlled and have a single end-to-end viewpoint. So SDN, it is real, it's here, and it's driving next generation enterprise networking. So when we talk about this SDN, why is it emerging? And for me in particular, a personal opinion, I think it's been all about the drive from cloud, born in the cloud type companies, them pushing out the characteristics of how they present, how they sell, how their customers access, buy, and use services. And these very same principles are being driven into the peripheral ecosystem, which includes telecommunications service providers. So even though telco has had programmability for many years, going back to the 80s and intelligent networking, the delivery of that capability has always been rather insular, and even to some extent really kind of packaged for the use of the telco itself. But now what we're looking at is the traditional way that telecommunications companies have provided services in terms of quite fixed approaches, whether that's the capacity provided, whether it's the contract, how you manage the service, traditionally through, let's call it slower forms of communication or non-real time, such as emails, calls, signing order forms. These traditional network capabilities still exist in many elements of our telecommunications industry. What SDN does is bring us into the world of the cloud approach, where communication services can be accessed online and in immediate circumstances. They're visible firstly so that you can find them and orchestrate them. They can be delivered very quickly, and the type of service, whether it's capacity or extension, can be modified very, very quickly and very easily. The commercial terms as well have changed very much. So traditionally, for those of us who've been in the telecoms game for some time, will know that 3-year terms were very, very common. But what we've done with the advent of SDN and programmable networking and services is that we can now essentially provide services for a much more limited or smaller period of time, including a single day. And these terms are very easily configurable. The other aspect that SDN excites particularly myself about is this ability for service providers of a like mind and type to be able to integrate their services not just at the physical layer, that is physically connecting the network, but also at the application or service layer, so that one service provider can control somebody else's network, or at least a virtual element of that, without having to go through a long drawn out paper process, and which essentially means that the service is duplicated and not integrated. So this is a huge, huge advantage of SDN and its ability to interwork applications. And it just makes it easier to use. And overall, the service offering is improved. So SDN, it's just a no-brainer in terms of the value it delivers over and above the traditional methodology of providing networking by telecommunication service providers. And as a result, enterprises should be asking the question, do you have an SDN or orchestration play in your portfolio? Because that is going to make me more agile. So I've mentioned a few elements of value arising for the enterprise based on this emergence of a distributed ecosystem and being able to connect to that very quickly. But these 5 bullet points I look at in terms of stepping stones are pretty much the 5 types of questions I might ask if I was in a large scale or medium scale enterprise with a reasonably distributed business application environment. I'm first off looking at what is the digital experience both for me, and how does that advantage my customer base in the near or long-term future. So this digital experience enabling me to access the services or capabilities in an online manner, being able to present that out via APIs or programmability is really, really important in the future. And as traditional enterprises more and more, or see more and more competition from born in the cloud companies, this ability to access my core architecture services in a really fast and interesting way is important for me as I go through a digital transformation process to be able to compete in the next generation world. If you're already an established sort of born in the cloud type company, then there's no other way that you would want to work. The other or next step is hyperscalability. And I don't mean hyper as in going up and not down, but the ability to really scale quickly is a key in terms of being able to deal with issues, incidents, rapid growth. This ability to change as and when you need to, and have the rest of your foundation services, the architecture that you rely on to deploy and win business yourself. enabling that to move not just instantly, but in scale is another tick point that as you grow as a business, you need to be able to access and manage. The third step is seamless integration. This ability to integrate my physical and logical and application world very, very simply without having to go through a lot of pain regarding physical interconnection, multiple account management, multiple service providers. This ability to access functionality in a very seamless integration environment is all important now. This enables agility, it enables effectiveness, both from a service perspective, but also from a cost perspective. So this is another very important check box or tick box when you're thinking about how you start to bring in more advanced technical service providers or even look at your existing base. The fifth point is this rapid collaboration. So this point here is around, am I receiving the ability to create opportunities for collaboration myself? Can I control who and how I'm going to collaborate with, whether it's bringing in a new service provider or bringing in a new partner or bringing in a new customer? Does this architecture allow me to collaborate very, very quickly? And am I being given tools that allow me to be an agent for change as well? And then the fifth bullet point in terms of accessing this growing distributed ecosystem we now know as our business trading world, where I have multiple different service providers spread all over the world for my core and mission critical systems such as CRM and ERP and et cetera, but as well as my smaller niche service providers and applications, bringing those into a single digital ecosystem that I can access, manage, and orchestrate very, very simply. So these are a number of additional bullet points that we need to be asking ourselves, both as members of an enterprise, but also as a buyer of services. So as I move into how Epsilon's viewpoint looks in terms of providing networking, this is a really interesting story on this slide that I'd like to talk about. And this is kind of a peek in terms of how we start to see the horizontal layer of networking being presented to enterprise to access how they manage their network, how they access different types of networks. So this new connectivity options for the enterprise is essentially saying that if you think of your physical network as one great horizontal fabric, and we'll talk about fabric a little later, there are different types of networks that are not usually made that clear as options for enterprises. The first is what we call IP transit, and that is having access essentially to the world of the internet, but over a kind of gateway function, a business ISP function that's allowing very economical access to the internet through a very secure single connect gateway. This IP transit function enables you as a business or an enterprise to access the internet in a much more efficient and effective environment. Then there is something called peering. So peering is essentially accessing the community of the internet exchange through a single connection as well, where what you have is basically private end-to-end connectivity into a huge ecosystem of service providers that include carriers, mobile operators, ISPs, media and content, and more so other enterprise service providers. So within the peering community, there are many customers such as CRM services and fintech services that with peering, you can connect to and access those in a direct, connected manner, improving the quality of access, the speed of access to those business applications, reducing security, exposure, and latency. So really having a private internet plus type approach. The third option is something called private interconnect, which most companies would be quite familiar with. That's privately interconnecting into a specific telecoms carrier. And then the fourth is private network, where as a business you can access a private network that would provide you distributed access all over the world into many, many different types of companies. So what's happening now is that enterprises, without maybe realizing it right now, are starting to have multiple options in terms of how they connect into their business architecture and business application community. And it's companies like Epsilon who are starting to present these in a very accessible and cost-effective manner and providing choice on how you best access your business ecosystem through all these different options. And eventually, a lot of this decision-making process will be driven by artificial intelligence being either hosted at the enterprise level or within the telecommunication service provider level, making those decisions on how best to route your traffic around access systems based on particular rules, logic, and needs. So what I'm going to start to talk about now is for someone like Epsilon who embraced programmability, SDN, the ability to present services in an online manner quite some number of years ago. What I want to talk about is what our approach was in terms of how we started to design our own environment and ultimately to present our own services to our customer base. So when we sat down and understood what we needed to do in terms of helping to evolve both ourselves and our customer base, we really came up with something that at the time we called the 4 C's. And this is really a step-by-step approach to understanding how we should present our services. But these 4 C's are very interesting ideas in terms of questions that enterprises themselves can ask both themselves on how they present their own services, but also how when they're looking at procuring services, what type of questions they should be asking. So the first is something we call conceive, and this is where is it easy to identify and design a solution that I need to my problem. So how you present your service portfolio, how you make access to that very available and very easily identifiable is very, very important. That's the most important step in terms of presenting your services online or to your customer base, is making sure that they can conceive that there's a solution there for them with you. The second C is click. And this is, okay, now we've drawn the customer in, we've drawn either the enterprise or even ourselves as internal consumers of our service. Can we then start to get the information very, very simply, just through simple clicks? And that could be that I need a quote, or I want to make an order. Once I've seen that I'm happy with everything, I want to confirm that and place that order or whatever the function is that I'm trying to perform. The third C is create. And in this case, what we're talking about here is, okay, the customer, the user has now confirmed the order, they've placed the order, we need to create the service. So can we configure that service immediately, deploy that service, whatever term we want to use it in this case? Can that service be turned up live in an immediate scenario? And then the fourth C is one that quite often companies, individuals, we forget ourselves, but this is as important as any of the previous 3 C's, as this is what we call consume. This is, okay, the service is up live and running. How am I consuming that service? Can I see how I'm consuming that service? Is the service healthy? Can I change the service? This consumption orientated viewpoint, enabling the customer, the user, to have visible access, is essentially the ability through visibility to have control. Visibility is control. Sometimes we use the term visibility and control, but as long as something's visible, I can do something about it. If I can see a pattern or a challenge or an issue, I can do something about it. So this fourth C of consuming the service is just as important as all the other three C's. So our approach in terms of what Epsilon have done to address this emerging change of service provisioning, service access, service presentation is we came up with a orchestration layer and portal environment that we call Infini. So what Infini is, and the first bullet point here, orchestration, is the key, is we created an orchestration layer first. So our initial approach was to enable the presentation of our networking capability and the services within that environment, present that up for orchestration. So Infini is an orchestration layer. What that means is that we can create services, push that down into the network, and have that network deploy the service very, very quickly. The next key element is to enable that to work immediately. So presenting all of that in an on-demand, intelligent-like manner. So providing network services that are intelligent and having those services deployed immediately. The third element I've spoken about already is the network and service analytics. This visibility is control. So presenting what's happening to your network service, what network services you have, and what is the trending. So being able to see past data on performance and being able to therefore calculate trending is as important as any other component of the service. And then presenting everything through web-based portals and APIs. So these are the four cornerstones of what Epsilon calls Infini and how we present access to our services. And it's important to note as well that Epsilon itself uses and consumes Infini as a service for our own internal orchestration and service provisioning and service management. And so we do eat our own dog food, as previous companies have said before. But these are the four cornerstones of Infini and how and what we present out to our customer base. And we do that via a web-based portal and also from mobile applications supported by our deployment within the iOS and the Android environment. So what we're looking at here is essentially how I look personally, but how anybody in an enterprise environment, particularly ICT, should be looking at what does Infini do for me and how do we access this very, very large scale ecosystem that is out there now that my business can access and needs to access. So essentially, Infini's approach is a hierarchical approach looking at a top-down, or in this case, left to right approach from a pyramid perspective in what is it that I want to access and control, whether that's from provisioning, etc. There are different types of networking and services that a company like Epsilon presents. In this case, you can see 5 different module or types, whether that's peering, access to cloud services, traditional networking through either Epsilon data centers or Epsilon third-party partner data centers and POPs, voice services, and enterprise connectivity, that is connecting buildings into a network environment or to a data center. So Infini has the approach of being able to present ordering and access and provision on demand into these environments, of which then break out into their subsets. And in the cloud example here, you can see as an example, these are just examples. There are many more than this, but for cloud service providers, IaaS companies, if you will, such as Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Alibaba, and being able to access and orchestrate these and then break out into the SaaS and PaaS companies that sit over and above them, presenting that as an access point through a single gateway. Many companies might use the term single pane of glass, being able to orchestrate those. So this is the Infini enablement layer of accessing these different types of services and then being able to access the sub elements and then construct services that enable connectivity and access and user function into their subsets and sub-subsets. The next thing in terms of strategy is for us to continue as telecommunications evangelists and developers, the integration and service threading between these different elements. And that's a project that Epsilon has worked very hard on over the last few years to start to drive capability to service thread a voice service with a cloud service, with a peering service. So this is an ongoing project. It's very large, but this is the future for telecommunications. So we begin to sum up what it is that we're enabling and presenting from an Infini perspective, particularly around physical networking. And this is a really good, simple slide showing essentially that there is a new, different physical connected ecosystem of which application environments and SDNs like Infini are enabling rapid on-demand connectivity to. And these instances are, if we start from the right, moving around, are data centers, and data centers essentially are the new exchange and have been for many, many years now. The data center is critical in terms of being able to orchestrate connectivity in and out of that data center to bring whatever is stored and located in that data center, bring that out to the community, open it up. The next, I will go anti-clockwise in this case, is cloud, and where the cloud service providers are essentially the non-physical data centers that we control, where applications in particular are stored, but those applications actually are worthless if they're not connected. So enabling that cloud application layer to access my physical infrastructures that might be stored in a data center is critical for running my business. The next element is, of course, the enterprise itself, and that enterprise logically being located in a building somewhere and being able to bring that building connected into an ecosystem that exists between the cloud in terms of virtualization and the data center that might be some of my physical instance as well as certain business applications is critical. And then finally, connecting internet exchanges. I've touched on this point here, and the internet exchange is the new interconnect model for enterprise. A single connection into a huge ecosystem in one place is a logical place for an enterprise to start to consider on how it connects to its business ecosystem. For instance, many IXs, certainly in Western Europe, have up to 800 community members, which include anything, as I've mentioned before, from carriers all the way through to payment systems, fintech systems, CRM systems. So this new single connection ecosystem is emerging as a real legitimate opportunity for enterprise to continue to evolve its business. And if we look at all of these points from the perspective of single network, what we have is what is becoming known and has become known probably as a fabric. And so building these global fabrics, presenting these global fabrics as a single global digital ecosystem that is accessible and programmable and controllable is a must for, firstly, any emerging or any existing telecommunication service provider, but also it's a must from an enterprise perspective, enabling the enterprise itself to run its business more efficiently and more effectively, and in some cases, being able to present change and development and creativity and innovation to itself and to its customer base. So finally, what are the end results? Again, the way I like to present is really to provide the audience, and in particular the end customer, with a series of checkpoints. So from an assessment perspective, what is it that enterprise should be looking for when they're talking to telecommunication service providers? These 5 boxes, if you will, really help me in terms of clarity understand what it is that I should be presenting out as a service to my customer base, and therefore I should be being asked, is this how we present our services? The first, as you can read, is cloud and content as a vertical community access. This is really important. The community that we know in the cloud in particular isn't horizontal anymore. It's not just other telcos connecting me then to their ecosystem. It's me accessing my ecosystem, which is vertical. It is, I have a need to connect to a telco. I have a need to connect to an IaaS company. I have a need to connect to a platform as a service company or a software as a service company, because these companies help drive my business. So does the service provider I'm talking to provide access to this vertical community that I need to access? If so, are they providing it in a really interesting way, in a programmable format that's presenting not just my data needs, but also my voice needs from a connectivity perspective? Is that company exploring smart networking through the ability to present in a multiple number of ways, through applications on mobile telephones, through web portals, even through the ability for me to take that capability in an API and integrate it into my own application overlay if I have one? So these 3 next generation questions are really, really important. The next point is visibility. Is everything I'm going to procure from this service provider going to be visible to me? It's critical that I can understand what's happening with my services as I utilize those services and integrate them into my own service pack. So it's critical about this visibility, and does that then lend itself to give me control over what I want to do or what I need in terms of access to those services? So these 5 points, I think, from a summary perspective, are the critical next generation capabilities. I've mentioned a couple of them a few times, but that's because they're so important. This is what telecoms companies such as Epsilon are presenting to our customer base right now. And if you're a buyer or a consumer of telecommunication services, this is what you should be asking your partners on. Is this their roadmap? Is it what they can present right now? And does it give me more flexibility, make me more agile, and enable me and my customers to be more successful? And so with that, I think we'll move on to the last slide, which is essentially myself, Mark Daly, thanking you all for your attention. I enjoy talking around this topic very much. It's certainly an exciting time to be in the telecommunications world. It's an exciting time to be in the enterprise world, orchestrating solutions using the tools that are becoming available, and also being able to become more agile and serve your customers in more and interesting ways. So thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Sherry.
Thank you, Mark. That concludes our webinar for today. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop your question in the question and answer box below, or drop us an email at info@epsilontel.com. We'll get back to you as soon as possible. And once again, thank you for joining us today in our webinar, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.